Tonight on The Buzz, we are looking at archiving. There are 3 ways we can archive: cloud, tape, and disk. Which is the best? We'll find out tonight. Our first guest is Larry O'Connor, the CEO of OWC. Larry starts our discussion with a look at all 3 options, along with his recommendations on what technology makes sense today. Next, Andy Klein, Product Marketing Director for Backblaze, talks about the differences between backups and archives and what we need to know to successfully archive our files. Next, Anthony Juliano is the Senior Account Manager for FujiFilm. FujiFilm makes magnetic tapes for LTO systems. Tape is at the heart of almost all archive systems, including cloud services. Tonight, Anthony shares his insights on the economics of tape. Next, Chris May is the Business Development Specialist for Media and Entertainment for Spectra. Chris talks about how to prepare files for archiving, how to avoid software obsolescence, and how to find and access files after they're archived. Next, Denis LeConte is the Vice President of Technology for Iron Mountain Entertainment Services. Archives are more than digital data. They are also photographs, papers, books, and other physical items. Tonight, Denis explains what we need to know to preserve all of our assets and, more importantly, how to get them back. All this plus James DeRuvo with our weekly doddleNEWS update. The Buzz starts now.
Since the dawn of digital filmmaking,
authoritative,
one show serves a worldwide network of media professionals,
current,
uniting industry experts,
production,
filmmakers,
post-production,
and content creators around the planet.
Distribution.
From the media capital of the world in Los Angeles, California, the Digital Production Buzz goes live now.
Welcome to the Digital Production Buzz, the world's longest-running podcast for the creative content industry, covering media production, post-production, and marketing around the world. Hi, my name is Larry Jordan. Tonight, we look at archiving our projects for the long term. We can store our projects to disk, tape, or the cloud, but which option is best? Tonight, we talk with experts in all 3 platforms to find the answer, and the answer will surprise you. Before we start, though, I want to invite you to subscribe to our free weekly show newsletter at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Every issue, every week, provides quick links to the different segments on the show, plus articles of interest to filmmakers. Best of all, it's free and comes out every Saturday morning. And now it's time for our doddleNEWS update with James DeRuvo. Hello, James.
Happy Hardware Thursday, Larry.
Boy, I tell you, is that the truth? Let's get right to it. What's the news?
Well, the news is blowing up over Apple announcing updates to the MacBook Pro line. Their new 13 and 15-inch MacBook Pros will have 6-core 8th generation Coffee Lake processors, a T2 security processor for on-the-fly encryption, AMD Radeon discrete graphics, True Tone Retina display, all the usual refinements. So it looks to be a very sweet-looking laptop.
Well, given that these were only announced this morning, what's your initial reaction?
Well, with the latest MacBook Pro, I'm wondering why Apple didn't opt to use the Intel Ice Lake processor, which is scheduled for release just next month. It could just be bad timing, or that Apple is already moving beyond Intel and preparing for their next generation laptop designs, which are reported to be using their in-house designed Apple processor by 2020. Either way, the 2018 MacBook Pro could be the last Intel-based MacBook we see coming out of Cupertino.
All right, that's the news from Apple. What else happened today?
Well, Blackmagic is getting into the external graphics processor game. They are announcing their new eGPU designed in cooperation with Apple. It's got built-in Radeon Pro 580 graphics cards, dual Thunderbolt ports, HDMI ports, 4 USB 3.1 ports, so there's plenty of connectivity there. And it's calibrated to give DaVinci Pro users increased performance for editing, color correction, and real-time effects, and it'll be for sale for $699 exclusively through Apple.
What's your reaction?
Well, for higher-end projects like video editing, virtual reality, and higher-end video gaming, it was really only a matter of time before Blackmagic was going to get into this game with their own distinctive spin on it. But what I find interesting is that its focus is solely on DaVinci, which I expected. But since Apple worked with them to design the array, there's absolutely no mention on how it works with Final Cut Pro or Apple Motion. I'm sure it'll be just as fast, though, but there is one downside. The new eGPU is not upgradable, so you can't add your own card, and that means you'll be buying a new one a year or two down the road. And at $700 a shot, that's just not cricket.
All right, that's Blackmagic and Apple. What's our third story this week?
Seed & Spark wants to give you $50,000 to film a feature in your hometown. Teaming up with the Duplass Brothers, the crowdfunding site's Hometown Heroes Initiative is offering $50,000 in no-interest loans for the most compelling pitches of a feature film set in a small town that doesn't include being located in New York or California. Narrative and documentary projects will be considered, and the Duplass brothers will executive produce 6 chosen films. Filmmakers must shoot 75% of their film in their hometown and raise a substantial amount in crowdfunding to match the $50,000 in no-interest loans in order to qualify for consideration.
Well, it seems like with all our news stories today, I'm asking your opinion, so what's your opinion of this?
I like this idea, Larry. Living in a suburb myself, I do know that there's a wealth of compelling stories and folklore and talent that can come out of a small town community. It's easy to write a film that takes place in a metropolitan setting where all your resources are, all the talent is, but to shoot in a small town has its own particular challenge and vibe, which is ideal for indie film production. But it's important to remember that these loans are no interest for the life of the loan, and that's cool, but they do have to be paid back, which is a change from the grants given out last year.
All right, those are our top 3 stories. What other stories are you following this week?
Other stories we're following, we've got a tutorial on freeing up space on your iPhone for mobile filmmaking. I review the Joby Gorilla Pod mobile rig, which could be my latest favorite camera accessory for your camera bag. And we have 10 tips for starting up a new video blog for those who want to get onto YouTube. That's what we're working on. What's tonight's show about, Larry?
James, tonight we're looking at archiving our files for the long term, 10 years or more.
Sometimes just keeping a file handy for a year is a big challenge.
Yeah, and what I discovered in preparing tonight's show is that there are both hardware challenges and software issues, and we'll cover all of these tonight. And James, for folks that want to learn more about key industry news, where can they go on the web?
All these stories and more can be found at doddleNEWS.com.
And James DeRuvo is the editor-in-chief of DoddleNEWS and joins us every week. I'll see you next Thursday.
I'll see you next Thursday from Comic-Con.
Oh, that's going to be cool. Here's another website I want to introduce you to, doddleNEWS.com. DoddleNEWS gives you a portal into the broadcast, video, and film industries. It's a leading online resource presenting news, reviews, and products for the film and video industry. DoddleNEWS also offers a resource guide and crew management platform specifically designed for production. These digital call sheets, along with their app, directory, and premium listings, provide in-depth organizational tools for busy production professionals. DoddleNEWS is a part of the Thalo Arts community, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with resources you need to succeed. Whether you want the latest industry news, need to network with other creative professionals, or require state-of-the-art online tools to manage your next project, there's only one place to go, doddleNEWS.com. Larry O'Connor is the founder in 1988 and the CEO of Otherworld Computing, which we all know as OWC. OWC is both a reseller and a developer supporting all things Mac for more than 25 years. Hello, Larry. Welcome back.
Hey, glad to be back, Larry.
In the past, when you and I have talked about storage, we've focused on high speed and high capacity, the requirements that we need for video production and post. But for tonight's show, though, I want to look longer term. Let's imagine, for our conversation, that our movie is done, and now we need to hang on to it for the long term, not just the finished program, but all of our source assets as well. How does our thinking about storage need to change as we shift our thinking from immediate high performance into storage for the long term?
This is a key point. It will all depend upon how we define the long term and what the kind of accessibility and utilization of that stored media is going to be expected when that long term becomes the present and that need is time to be acted upon.
Let's define long term. In today's technology, and given how quickly it changes, is long term measured in months or years or decades? I mean, clearly, as filmmakers, we need to hang on to this for decades, but that may not be technologically possible.
I'd say the technology is there. I mean, in fact, things like the Millennium Disc technology that is supposed to last literally hundreds of years on Blu-ray and DVD media, while you're limited to 50 or 100 gigabytes capacity per disc. I mean, this is media for something that's truly priceless that you're looking to preserve, is designed to last for the ages, so to speak, with the intent to ensure that there's long-term accessibility support for those formats as well. In today's age, we look at media. I mean, there's so much creative material being generated. I mean, you're doing you're capturing for a production, you're doing the edit, you get all the different pieces in between, the final cut and the editing and the original source and the B-roll. I mean, on and on and on and on. But what you produce for today, certainly we're looking at listening to different media outlets that say, we're going to release something today, but in another 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, we're going to come back to that original content, and we're going to produce it again for a whole new generation, which may mean reusing pretty much everything as it was first produced, or re-editing from the ground up from the original source material to make something similar yet different and applicable to the audience that they choose to reach in that new day. Now, different storage considerations certainly may apply.
There's three main options for long-term storage today: locally connected hard disk or SSD, LTO tape, and the cloud. OWC focuses on locally connected hard disks. Why should we consider these for long-term storage?
The cloud, I think, is a good backup means. I'm not quite sure for the long-term storage viability there. I mean, it has an ongoing cost. You're trusting your data in the hands of a third party. You run different risks with long-term accessibility. When you need it, when you want it, and just keeping track of it on the cloud. Everything on paper is super easy, but when you get into the logistics of actually managing data off-site, that can be a little more complex than, let's say, what first may meet the eye, especially as standards and services evolve and change over the years. How it works today may be very different down the road after whatever next service upgrade. And that's fine for a consumer, and that's fine for businesses, but as an archive, it could get interesting. Tape, I think certainly there's a lot of value in tape. Tape has a pretty good lifespan. It's not infinite. I think it can be expensive, but the downside of tape, once you have the initial investment of the LTO drive, the downside is when you do want to access that data again, it's still pretty darn slow. The promise of it being like a hard drive really isn't quite the case when it comes to accessing that data. And you're still going to have to transfer it back to a media to do pretty much anything you want with that particular media. You're not going to be working with it on the tape. And, of course, a local drive, the challenge there, of course, you're going to need something that can support that drive that will plug into it. While the drives themselves, I don't think we're at any point going to have to worry for certainly decades to come accessing a hard drive, the straight SATA interface or NVMe, PCIe. I mean, those standards I think will have relatively easy legacy support maintained. But if you have an external solution with Thunderbolt or USB, those sorts of interfaces are certainly likely to evolve and change and be something different. So you'd be more looking to access the media. The other thing with any sort of spinning drive, even solid state to actually a substantial degree, you've got to keep those units exercised. You don't necessarily want to park a drive in a closet for 20 years. Not to say that it won't work and won't spin up, but things that sit, especially the capacitors and other things on the drive, there's not regular exercise, periodic exercise. I don't mean every month necessarily, but at least every year or so, get those things powered up. You run the risk of components failing just from non-use.
Given today's hard drive technology, how long should we expect a drive to last if we're not using it every day, like we're using it for longer-term storage? Is it something that we should plan to replace in 4 years or 10 or what?
If it's used once for an archive, if the data is loaded on it, and after that it's sitting in a closet, it's being stored, as long as there's exercise on the drive where the drive is brought up on a periodic basis, quite honestly, that drive should last an extremely long time. In terms of active use, where the drive is being used, it's being used in production, being used, and data is being rotated on it. It's used in your standard workflow, whether it's in a rack or it's something that you're taking around with you. If it's in normal use, while drives today definitely have good longevity, and certainly once you get past 3 or 4 years, I think it's a good idea to start rotating in new drives. And a drive you take out of rotation that's been put through, heavy use for several years. While it's okay to archive with such a drive, I would certainly use it as an additional backup, not as a primary backup. The issue is the longer a drive is in use, the higher the probability of your event occurring on a drive, and that is worth far more than the cost of those drives today. Drives are very cheap compared to what you put on them. It's not worth the risk.
If we're looking for longer-term storage where performance is not critical, how can we save money on storage? In other words, is it okay to buy slower drives?
I don't know that you really save enough with a so-called slower drive versus a standard drive, a slower spinning drive. Perhaps, but a drive that's specifically slower performance-wise, that's geared for a lower-end application, a lower-end use. Even though some of these drives that are just for archive, you're saving a few percentage points for a drive that's potentially has other compromises. And I shouldn't say compromises. There's other aspects of the drive that result in it being in that lower performance category.
We're all comfortable with the idea of spinning media, especially spinning media for holding files for a long period of time. Can we do the same thing with SSDs? Are they going to be reliable and hold on to our data for a while? Or should we consider them really high performance and for shorter term projects?
Again, you have to define shorter term, but I would not take an SSD and put it on the shelf for 5 years.
Would not.
There's too many things that I would not. If you're going to archive, an SSD is not an ideal archive media for a number of different reasons. Not being energized, not being powered up. Any flash media, it doesn't matter. The longer that media sits, unpowered. For lack of a better term, the weaker the chargers get to store that data. An SSD is there for performance. You're paying for that performance relative to the cost of a hard drive. It doesn't make sense, even right then and there. Just on that basis alone, if you're going to put something to an idle state, a hard drive is a much lower cost medium, and it's able and far more suited for that kind of storage, that kind of archive purpose.
For people that want more information about the storage products that OWC offers, where can they go on the web?
Check out OWCdigital.com and or MacSales.com.
That website is OWCdigital.com and MacSales.com. And Larry O'Connor is the CEO of OWC. And Larry, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Larry. Thanks again for having us.
Andy Klein is the Director of Product Marketing at Backblaze. He also writes blogs on hard drive stats, smart stats, drive farming, hybrid data storage, and more storage than I can even keep track of. Hello, Andy. Welcome back.
Hi, how are you? Good to be on the show again.
It's always good to have you. Andy, how would you describe Backblaze?
Backblaze is a cloud storage company. We've been doing this for over 10 years. People give us their data. We keep it for them until they need it back.
Tonight, we're looking not at short-term storage, but long-term storage and archiving. How can Backblaze help us? Certainly,
as a cloud storage product, you can put your data out in the cloud, and we'll keep it for you. The best part about all of that is it gets rid of a whole bunch of infrastructure in your organization, and we take care of all of the messy bits. The storing, hiring people to kind of manage where it is kept, the software that keeps moving things around so that you don't get things like bit rot and all kinds of wonderful things like that. And then organizing it so that whenever you need it back, like I said, you ask us for it and we can send it on back to you.
One of the things we're looking at in tonight's show is longer-term storage, what I'm calling archiving.
Mm-hmm.
From your point of view, what's the difference between backups and archives?
That's a great question because most people confuse that. Think of a backup as a snapshot of your computer, for example, at a given point in time so that you can restore to that particular point in time. And then many services, including one of ours, also gives you the ability to have some type of a memory, let's say 30 days worth of files that you keep. An archive is something that it's also a snapshot at a period in time, but it doesn't live and breathe. It's basically frozen in time at that point, and you typically store that someplace else from your computer. And then the only time you go back to an archive is when you need something that's disappeared from your backup, for example, because it's aged out or been deleted, or perhaps because you have to do some type of a full system restore.
It seems to me that there's three broad categories of archiving. One would be archiving to the cloud, one would be archiving to tape, and one would be archiving to hard disk. Of those three, which do you recommend?
All three.
How come?
Well, first of all, we always have a mantra here since we started of what they call 3-2-1 backup. So something doesn't exist until it's three different places. So perhaps on your computer, perhaps on a local hard drive next to your computer, and then a third copy, for example, in the cloud. Tape is a reasonably viable mechanism, especially because we've been using it for years now, 30 years now plus, and it also stores solid archives. The economics of tape are getting to be something you have to pay attention to these days. It used to be just the most inexpensive way of doing it, even though the manpower required to do that was enormous, but it was fairly inexpensive otherwise. It's that combination of things that is the most important way to look at doing archiving. So you might keep something on a hard drive for fairly quick access. It's on a local hard drive next to me. I can actually see it on my desktop. I can just drag things over and I can get something back. Then using a combination of the cloud and tape, depending on the size of your organization, the fluidity of the data, how quickly it changes, truthfully, how much access you need to it. Tape is not particularly easy to get stuff back from. You can certainly get a whole tape and then you got to go find what you need and so on. But it does store a fairly decent amount of time and it holds it for some number of years. But it's that combination of things, getting stuff into multiple places in multiple media that we just think is the best thing to do.
I was very impressed with your answer being so ecumenical when you say you really need to have it in multiple places. I thought it was going to be all cloud all the time, but that was not your point of view.
No, it's not our point of view too. The truth is there's plenty of data to go around for all of us. So I don't have to be that greedy. One and two, we do believe it. We believed it since we started just doing the online backup product that you need to have your stuff in multiple places.
That you're saying that there is no one single solution. The idea is to spread your files across multiple solutions.
Spread copies of your files across multiple solutions. Now, you don't have to go the tape route, for example. If you want to keep everything in the cloud, you can do that. And then we would suggest using multi-vendor, not multi-location, multi-vendor, because you just never know what's going to happen. So I think that's the most important thing, is to get multiple copies of the same data in different places.
How should we be preparing our files to ensure that we can access them in the future?
As wonderful as our services are, I can give you a file back, but if you don't have the application to read it, or if that application doesn't run on your infrastructure anymore, that's something to pay attention to. And that goes, by the way, whether it's an application you download on your computer or it's a cloud-based application that's just gotten outdated and you bring something back, data back to use in that, and it doesn't work because the file format's changed or whatever. One of the things that's really important is keeping track of the different applications that you're using and holding on to them for as long as you can, whether it's physical copies or access to them, so that you can access the data. Without that, I can give you back a file, and it's completely unreadable because of whatever standard they were using at the time, whatever format they were using at the time, if that application is dead. And then if you know an application is going to go away, you probably need to be thinking about how you're going to upgrade the data in your archive. And that's something we just haven't given a lot of thought to over the years.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we can't take our archives, park them somewhere where they're Backblaze or somewhere else, and then forget about them. We have to actively manage our archives.
That is absolutely the case. So the idea of forgetting about something for more than a few years, and even that's questionable, but let's say a few years, let's say 5 years to pick a number, is foolhardy if you think you're going to get it back. We haven't proven that we can standardize on formats. I mean, there's a handful of them, but I have an old Osborne computer that runs CP/M with an old word processing application on it. I have data. I know I can't read it any other way other than that environment, and that's going to continue to change, and we're going to continue to improve applications and so on, and we think the cloud might solve it. Oh, look, I'll put everything in my, just to pick something, Google Apps, but even those age out over time. 10 years from now, will something that you created still be able to be read? Will they auto-upgrade everything for you? Wow, that's a great service. I seriously doubt it they're going to do all of that for free, but, so those are the kinds of things. I think you have to, your point is well taken. It's your data. You have to decide that you're going to have to manage it, even in an archive.
Andy, I think using the cloud for backups makes a lot of sense. My big concern about using the cloud for archiving is that we're continually renting the space we need for our files, basically in perpetuity, which gets really expensive. How do you answer that?
First of all, the cost of the cloud is continually coming down. We kind of changed that landscape a few years ago. People are starting to now come up with services that are reasonably competitive. So you're paying for it one way or the other. So if you put it on tape, and you think, oh, I'm putting it on tape, and now I put it in, a storage system offline. To that point, how easy is it to go and check? What you should be doing is on a regular basis bringing back some of those tapes and checking to make sure that they're still good, because you don't want to find out 20 years from now that tape was no good 10 years ago. So you have to always bring those things back. There's a whole management that goes into tapes that should be done, that many people skip. Or if you're using a service to do it, you're paying for it. So it all works out, whether you spend the money to store your data and let us do all of that work, or whether you decide that you're going to do all of that work by either managing a tape system or perhaps a closet full of external hard drives that you keep all of your archives on. The cost end up being roughly the same.
For people that want more information about the services Backblaze provides, where can they go on the web?
It's, of course, Backblaze, BACKBLAZE.com.
That website again is all one word, BACKBLAZE, Backblaze.com. And Andy Klein is the Director of Product Marketing at Backblaze. And Andy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you again, Larry.
Anthony Juliano is the Senior Account Manager for FujiFilm Recording Media USA. He works with resellers and end users throughout the Southwest, helping them secure and manage their archive data using LTO media. Hello, Anthony. Welcome.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for inviting Fuji to the longest-running podcast for the creative content industry.
You have been paying attention. I give you points for that. How would you describe FujiFilm Recording Media? What do you guys do?
We are the world's leading manufacturer of data tape. Our U.S. headquarters is in New York, and we have our manufacturing facility in Bedford, Massachusetts. For the media and entertainment space, the de facto standard for archiving has been on LTO.
You used the word archiving, and our show today is talking about archiving, but how would you describe the difference between backups and archives?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it does require a little bit of clarity. When you have a backup, it's your production data. It's a copy of your production data. With an archive, it's actually you're moving that to a permanent place on tape, preferably, and it's not to be altered. So a backup is a copy of your production data, and archive is a move.
So an archive is material that we don't need to access on a daily basis.
That's correct.
I just want to clarify, because it's important for people to understand, does Fujifilm make LTO tape drives or just the tape that goes in them?
No, we do not manufacture hardware. However, there's the TPCs, the technology provider companies that we are aligned with very, very closely, and that would include HP, Quantum, and IBM. Those are the three technology provider companies that have the hardware as well, the tape drives themselves, as well as the ATLs, the automated tape library systems.
Well, let's shift gears and talk about archiving for a minute. There's three different methods of archiving. We could archive our materials to the cloud, or to tape, or to disk in some form. Why should we be looking at tape and not cloud or disk for our long-term storage?
Excellent question. Tape is by far the least expensive option for long-term storage. A lot of times people are trying to tier their data for quicker access or for network access. When you're able to identify the various tiers of data, kind of determines if it's to be on disk or on tape or in the cloud. But by far, tape is the best option for long-term archival.
One of the things you told me at Creative Storage is that even the cloud vendors use tape.
Yes. Matter of fact, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, as well as some of the smaller, medium-sized hyperscale accounts are using tape in the cloud. They're using that for their archiving. It's an insurance policy for their clients. But a mix of all three is what we recommend.
I'm hearing that from a number of different people, is that you really want to have your archives, don't put all your eggs in one basket, spread it across multiple formats. Do you agree?
Yes, that is absolutely the best, is to spread it across those three platforms. For long-term archiving, without question, tape is your best option.
What should we be doing to prepare our files for long-term storage?
The key is LTFS. After Generation 5, LTO5, LTFS was a software that the TPCs, the technology provider companies, provide for free. So HP, Quantum, and IBM have this particular software that's available, linear tape file system. It's self-describing, so it's basically the ability to drag and drop. And then from a migration standpoint, that seems to work very, very well for customers, because it doesn't necessarily matter what operating system the data is prepared or what version of hardware. It is 2 levels back read and 1 level back read write. But as long as you're with the LTFS software, you're able to drag and drop that data and have migration with ease. So you should prepare your files, if possible, in LTFS.
What should we be doing to future-proof our data, not just in terms of technology obsolescence, but software obsolescence?
That is our key component with tape, is that is how you future-proof your data. A lot of the automated tape library systems have tremendous intelligence built in, where they're doing the migration with jobs that are scheduled at night or on weekends when the system is not quite as busy. So future-proofing your data has an awful lot to do with making sure that you're moving your data as you're migrating to newer technology. And let's face it, with the transfer speeds and the capacity that's needed because of the growth, there's ways that are needed to rethink how you're going to go about managing your legacy files. And in order to do that, LTFS, as well as being cognizant of the fact that you need to be 2 levels back, no more, from a read standpoint, and 1 level back read write, to make sure that you're migrating your data properly. But as long as you keep up with the migration path, then you're set for making sure you have access to those legacy files.
So in other words, you're advising that we have to actively manage our archives. We can't just simply put it on tape and put the tape on the shelf, but we've got to make sure that the tape stays compatible with current tape decks.
Correct. And there's a process of retensioning your cartridges and making sure that the data is still readable. And, people that really take care of their archives actually have that process in place.
Let's follow that for a second. Let's say we're a smaller company, not an enterprise, but we don't have a dedicated IT staff, but we're archiving tens of terabytes of files. What should we do on a regular basis, and how often, to make sure those tapes stay readable?
First of all, there are service bureaus that can help you do that and make sure that if you don't have that equipment any longer, that can be read onto a legacy type drive and make sure that it is readable and there's not any errors. I would say you could put that process together on a 6-month or an annual basis and make sure that those cartridges, that the data on those cartridges is readable.
So what do we need to do?
You need to make sure that you have the equipment and the software that data was created on to make sure that it's able to be read on a fairly regular basis. And again, I'd say every 6 months to a year. The data itself, if it's in temperature, humidity controlled environment, is good for 30 years. But you don't want to take that chance with not knowing that it's readable. So I would recommend doing that every 6 months or at least once a year.
So it's more than just simply put the tape in the drive and spin it all the way to the end and bring it back. We need to have the software open it up and just do a pass through it.
Correct. A lot of people don't do that. They just record it and they think that it's and generally speaking, it probably is okay. Again, because it's rated for 30 years in temperature, humidity controlled environment. But there are a number of service bureaus in town that actually will provide that service archiving long term. But internally, that can be done as well. You just have to be cognizant of making sure that you have that on your schedule.
For people who want more information about Fujifilm Media, where can they go on the web?
They can go to FujiFilmUSA.com/storage. And then for general information about LTO, you can go to LTO.org.
That website is all one word, Fuji, F-U-J-I, Film, F-I-L-M, USA.com/storage. And Anthony Juliano is the Senior Account Manager for Fujifilm Recording Media USA. And Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invite, Larry. I really appreciate it.
Chris May is the Business Development Specialist for Media and Entertainment for SpectraLogic. His job is to sell, build, manage, deploy, and implement complex digital media solutions for networks and digital media companies. Hello, Chris, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Larry.
How would you describe SpectraLogic?
SpectraLogic is a 40-year-old privately held company based in Boulder, Colorado, and we are a company that prides ourselves and works hard to preserve your data.
Well, that's a good thing, because tonight we're looking at long-term storage and archiving. How would you describe what an archive is?
An archive is a tier of storage that is economically affordable for content that isn't needed on a daily basis. So it's content that's still important to your organization, but it's stored off in a tier of storage that is easily acceptable, but not quite as expensive as that production storage that we all want.
What does tiered storage mean?
So tiered storage in a SpectraLogic, or in my years of being in the media entertainment business, is where you tier off the storage based off of the value of those assets to your organization. If you're working on stuff that needs flash storage, you'll store it off in flash storage. If it's an active project or content that needs to be instantly accessible to an organization, you'll put it off most likely on a production storage. And then you have your other tiers of NAS storage and archive storage and cloud storage. So essentially the way we look at it is from the perspective of tiers of storage that are economical and make sense to the value of that content to your organization.
So, for instance, if I have something which I don't need access to, I don't need to store it on high-performance RAIDs. I could store it on something that isn't quite as high performance.
Correct. And what we've done is we've created a nearline object-based archive disk solution. And so you can store it off on disk, which is a lot less expensive than those RAIDs of storage. And also you could store it off on tape, which is exponentially cheaper than those high ops production storage.
There's three main ways that we can archive. We can archive to disk, we can archive to tape, or archive to cloud. Do you have a recommendation?
It all depends on the business and how much your business can stomach without access to its content. So if you have end users, which I used to have when I worked in the sports industry, who needed multiple years worth of sports content readily accessible, in the past, we would always just kept that on production storage. Now that we have the technology in place, you can put older, less valuable content, less access content on disk at a much cheaper price than you would for that production storage. And then also tape based off of how much your content needs to be accessed. So you can really start to, especially with a lot of these MAM and DAM applications out there, really start to capture the metrics of how often content's being used and what the value of that content is to your organization, and you can tier it off. So if it is something that is accessed 3 or 4 times a month, yeah, maybe disk might be it. But if it's accessed once a year, twice a year, maybe tape. And then also if it's never accessed again or you don't have a DR, cloud would probably be the perfect solution for that.
What do you recommend we do to preserve our ability to play or access files that are more than 5 years old?
I would recommend you put it on something that is open sourced. So whether it be LTFS tape, which is the open source standard for LTO tape, or the databases that are writing to the SANs or the NASs or the archive disk, whatever those applications are, make sure that they're writing in a standard that's open that can be read by other applications.
Here, I should ask you about a paper that your boss wrote about looking at how nature preserves things over time.
This is something we adopted from Google, whereas they don't store their data on one technology. They store it across multiple different technologies. And so what my CEO did was write a book that in nature, we're kind of looking at technology like nature, is usually if you have one genetic thing and you don't have, you essentially die out. So if you're just relying on one thing and you get down to 2 animals that are genetically identical and they both die off and they can't reproduce, then that ends that. So what he is essentially saying is you spread it across multiple different technologies.
It sounds to me like you're saying that we should not put all of our archives in a single technological solution.
Not to get cliche here, but you don't necessarily want to put your eggs in one basket. We don't know where technology is going to be in 5 years. You don't know what the cloud's going to be like. We don't know what these workflows are going to be like. So why store your content, which is your business, and if your business revolves around video content, why risk that in something that could be obsolete in 5 years? The fact that is the economics of the cloud don't scale up for companies that deal with large video data sets, because ultimately the broadband owners, those costs are never going to go down. If all your content's living on-prem and you have a producer who all of a sudden recalls multiple terabytes of content, those egress fees are quite expensive and not controllable to the cloud providers. So those, once again, will never go away.
So you're saying not even if cloud storage was free, the cost of the internet to be able to access the cloud is essentially a hidden cost that we're not paying attention to.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we're seeing is most organizations who have been driven by their CFO or CIO to go to an all cloud environment, when they get those first bills, boy, that changes their mind quickly. On top of the fact that if you're a business and you have a finance department, a marketing department, try explaining to those groups why the internet is at a snail's pace, because I've got all this video assets coming in and clogging up my pipes. So it's not as clear cut, and that it goes back to what we talked about of what's it going to look like in 5 years. As the other gentlemen say, have something that you know you will have in 5 years.
How should we prepare our files for long-term storage?
That's the million-dollar question, because as you know, after every NAB, there's a new camera maker out there, or not new camera makers, but there's the camera makers coming out with these new file formats, and they're larger, 16K, 18K. Ultimately, what I suggest to my customers is make the best educated decision with the technology you have at the time, and always store it in the highest quality that you possibly can, because it's much easier to go down than it is up.
Where does AI figure into all of this?
I think AI is going to be revolutionary in the media entertainment industry, and as far as the amount of data that is going to be stored about your content. So think of a normal movie today probably has, and I'm speculating here, maybe 1,000 metadata points associated with it. So if you get into AI, when you could have hundreds of thousands of metadata pointers associated with that asset clip, that's going to exponentially make that content more valuable to your organization. But it's also going to have other people within your organization want to have access to that content. So essentially what I see is these non-SQL databases with millions of metadata pointers to assets that multiple different applications are going to need to be able to access and associate to the essence of the files and where those files are stored, be it cloud, be it production storage, be it whatever storage it is in 5 years, be it LTO technology.
For people who want more information about the products that SpectraLogic makes and to get more guidance in this sort of thing, where can they go on the web?
SpectraLogic.com.
That's all one word, SPECTRALOGIC, SpectraLogic.com. And Chris May is the Business Development Specialist for Media and Entertainment for SpectraLogic. And Chris, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure, Larry. Thank you.
I want to introduce you to a new website, Thalo.com. Thalo is an artist community and networking site for creative people to connect, be inspired, and showcase their creativity. Thalo.com features content from around the world with a global perspective on all things creative. Thalo is the place for creative folks to learn, collaborate, market, and sell their works. Thalo is a part of Thalo Arts, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with the resources you need to succeed. Visit Thalo.com and discover how their community can help you connect, learn, and succeed. That's Thalo.com. Denis LeConte is the Vice President of Technology for Iron Mountain Entertainment Services, based in Hollywood. He has over 25 years' experience working for Iron Mountain, NASA, Disney, Sony, and several post-production facilities. Denis has also won an Academy Award for Scientific and Engineering Achievement in the field of film preservation. Hello, Denis. Welcome.
Hello, Larry. Pleasure to be here.
How would you describe Iron Mountain Entertainment Services?
Iron Mountain Entertainment Services is the division of Iron Mountain that specializes in serving the media and entertainment industries. We not only, of course, archive media for the media and entertainment industry, but we also are privileged to be in the at the moment that archivists have prepared for, which is the restoration of the content for further use several years or several decades down the line.
Does Iron Mountain handle just digital files?
No, we handle all manners of media going back to the 30s, actually. We can make an MP3 of your wire recording and everything in between, including the old analog video formats and audio formats, all the way up to, of course, data restoration for the more modern media.
Your company is a part of Iron Mountain, but it's called Entertainment Services. What makes archiving for entertainment different from other industries?
This was set up as a specific division for very good reasons. The media entertainment industry has pretty different needs. Clients typically prefer a more high touch than a more corporate approach. And also, we want to take a much longer view of archiving. It's not Sarbanes-Oxley regulatory archival. It is very long term, and so the restoration aspect requires a lot of care.
How does your company help with long-term storage? What do you do that makes you unique?
We are developing best practices for storage, and we also are keeping a close eye on the media that we archive for our clients. And we're having these ongoing conversations about media lifecycle and data lifecycle with them in order to help them keep their content alive through the years. The issue is that it comes down to atoms. At the end, you're dealing with matter that decays, and it's necessary to be able to preserve that through the years and to migrate it. The days of archiving and leaving your film in a vault for 50 years are disappearing now. Archiving is more and more of a living thing. It's necessary to migrate the content fairly often in order to be able to keep it alive.
One of the things I enjoyed listening to you when you were chatting at the Creative Storage Conference a few weeks ago was your discussion of the challenges of de-archiving. The reason we put something in the archive is at some point we need to get it back. What are the challenges of bringing it back?
Yes. The process of retrieving something, of restoring something from archive is multi-layer cake of challenges. First of all, you have the media itself. Whether it be, usually it's going to be tape or a drive, it has to be in good enough condition to be readable. Once you have that, you're going into the hardware challenges because people will tend to store tapes. They won't tend to store the drives and the hardware necessary to restore that media. So we find ourselves scouring eBay for all tape drives and all equipment in order to be able to put together system configuration that will be able to retrieve that content. And once you manage to put something together that can do the restoration, then you are going into the fifth portion of the restoration challenge, where you have to find the right backup software or archival software that was used to prepare this archive. You can have always consideration, especially with Macintosh-generated content. The older Macintoshes used a file structure that's a little bit challenging to handle in modern days. And then the next layer is, of course, once you have your file, it's nothing without the software with which it was originally generated. So whether it be Pro Tools or Maya or something like that, you'll have to have the right software version. And we occasionally help with migrating that to more modern versions of the software. And then finally, of course, there is the whole metadata aspect of it. This is something that's coming to the fore rapidly, that you need to be able to find your content. You need to have sufficient metadata to find what you're searching for. In older content, the metadata tends to be a little sparse because people were archiving the files, but the science of actually classifying content tended to be a little bit emerging, especially when you're in a hurry, when you're in production. In later years, we're looking at this torrent of data and a veritable needle in a haystack problem in order to find the content that you want, because even though the content production has increased a lot, our abilities to search for it are still the same. We're still human. So there is a need to have a much richer metadata landscape in order to be able to properly search for content.
There's a term that I've heard called bit rot. What is it, and is it curable?
Bit rot describes a series of problems that cause degradation in your data, in terms of data loss, essentially. The main cause of that is basically tape degradation. It matters a great deal with digital data because if you lose one bit of a file when it's written to tape or disk, depending on the way it was written, you could pretty much lose the entire file. That's quite a problem. It's really important with digital media to be able to retrieve your file exactly as it was written in general. It's not curable. I think the solution to bit rot is prevention. And the way to prevent that is to have more than one copy and to migrate the copies that are found to be degraded.
You've touched on a number of issues. One, we want to have multiple copies of our data. Number two, we want to make sure that we actively manage our files. How should we prepare our files for long-term archiving?
Based on our experiences on the other end of that, there are a number of ways to be well prepared for that. Archiving something is essentially having a conversation with somebody you don't know 30 years from now who will not necessarily have the technology that you have access to or any of the knowledge that you have access to right now. So it's really important to have that in mind. And a lot of it comes down to standards, really. And this is something that's still kind of emerging. There is a plethora of archival and metadata standards right now that are public. So hopefully they'll have some lags in the future, but there isn't really any widespread adoption of any given standard for archiving yet. One of the biggest challenges that we're having in archive retrieval is proprietary software anywhere or hardware anywhere in the toolchain that is not published. That's one of our issues, which is why I'm kind of advocating for open standards wherever possible when it comes to preparing an archive.
Why should filmmakers consider using Iron Mountain for their archive needs?
Every project that we do tends to be a partnership with the client. It's designed for best practices and also paying a great deal of attention to the client's desires.
For people that want more information about Iron Mountain, where can they go on the web?
ironmountain.com/industries/entertainment.
Say that one more time.
ironmountain.com/industries/entertainment.
And Denis LeConte is the Vice President of Technology for Iron Mountain Entertainment Services. And Denis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
I was just thinking about Andy Klein's comment that a file needs to exist in 3 places to keep it safe. Archiving isn't a choice between tape or disk or cloud, but an intelligent use of all 3. I've also discovered that there's no free lunch. Tape has the highest startup cost in the purchase of the tape drive, though the per-tape cost is quite small. The cloud requires continual payments for as long as our assets are stored on the service, and hard disk costs range somewhere in the middle. What's even more important, though, is that we need to take an active role in managing our assets. Unlike years past, where we could store videotapes on the shelf to access when we needed, today technology changes too quickly for us to adopt such a casual attitude. Hard disks need to be spun up every 6 months, tapes need to be rewound and restacked each year, then migrated to the latest LTO format every 4 or 5 years. But it was the comments that Denis made that are the most important to media creators. Simply storing your files is not enough. You also need to store the operating system, the applications you use to create them, as well as any third-party plugins. Plus, you need to have the hardware necessary to play those files back. I still have 2-inch videotapes in my collection with no ability to play them back. Chris May has an Osborne computer from the 1970s, just in case. What the media community needs is the equivalent of PDFs for media. a format that includes everything we need to view and edit the file, as well as append metadata to keep track of what's in it. Standards committees like AES and SMPTE are starting to think about this, but the solution is a long way into the future. Developers today are far more interested in proprietary formats than archiving. In the meantime, we need to get in the habit of exporting XML files for all of our projects. XML is a format that can be read by multiple applications, unlike proprietary Premiere or Final Cut project formats. XML isn't the solution, it's a stopgap, but at least it's a start. To emphasize something Denis said, as you archive your projects, think about what you would need to tell someone 30 years in the future who's sitting there, staring at all these files in archaic formats, trying, as with Humpty Dumpty, to figure out how to put them all back together again. Just something I'm thinking about. I want to thank our guests this week, Larry O'Connor with OWC, Andy Klein with Backblaze, Anthony Juliano with FujiFilm, Chris May with SpectraLogic, Denis LeConte with Iron Mountain, and James DeRuvo with doddleNEWS. There's a lot of history in our industry, and it's all posted to our website at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Here you'll find thousands of interviews, all online and all available to you today. And remember to sign up for our free weekly show newsletter that comes out every Saturday morning. Talk with us on Twitter at DPBuzz and Facebook at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Our theme music is composed by Nathan Doogie Turner, with additional music provided by smartsound.com. Our producer is Debbie Price. My name is Larry Jordan, and thanks for listening to the Digital Production Buzz. The Digital Production Buzz is copyright 2018 by Thalo LLC.